there's never been a better class in my life than this, especially when those people are gone. We're so much better now, right? Now it's just us, right? There's just a few people gone. We have the essay test tomorrow. Should we just do it tomorrow? Step right up to the plate, show off. We have an essay test. That's why we did the thesis statement. You were here yesterday, third period. And was it third period? Yeah. All right. So, by the way, don't ask third period what I said about fifth period. But here's the thing. I'm giving you the question tomorrow. And yes, it is still a test, but I'll tell you tomorrow what you can have on it, what you can bring on Monday. You have the period to write in a way that's good. You be prepared, be confident to write a good essay in a way that's bad. Not only will not ever happen again, but I expect a lot of information. There's no excuse. That's one of the reasons why you should always run away from take-home exams. Even though this isn't quite a take-home exam. So, we'll talk about thesis statement. And just to review for a thesis statement, I gave you a nice little formula. Okay, so for thesis statement, what is an X? Yeah, the main point of the question. What's the Y? Yeah, your position. Why? You explain your position. Basically, your position. And then the blueprint is what? ABC in a 5-paragraph essay. We might do that again today. So we got to finish up where we're at. We just started because you guys are a little behind. So let's move.
You just said we were ahead.
No, ahead intellectually and morally. Yeah, you speak now behind. And you both missed that. And you missed the last 2 days. You were gone. You got to get out of my thesis. Did I give you someone my thesis? I gave you someone my thesis. So this is the things I talked about in class, and on my webpage I have a bunch of information on how to write a thesis statement. But this is essay writing tips too. Anybody else gone yesterday? I think that's it. That's what we said too. Yeah.
Are there any in-text citations?
Not for this. No, this is a timed essay, so you do not need that.
How long do we have to do it?
You will have the class period.
That's 40 minutes.
Not 40 minutes. It's like 41 minutes or something. But you should have all your organized. I mean, you should be done before that. Okay. And this is what I gave for actually writing. This is what I put on the board. See, there's certain things I require for a thesis. It's just the way it is. It should be close to certain things. Okay, so here we go. So we got the children and the holiday. And why did all of a sudden the secular holiday of Christmas appear? You know, secular means outside the bounds of religion, because Christmas was not an important Christian holiday. Yes?
People could sell overpriced items to kids.
Partially. So it's a marketing thing, but also because parents, what about children? Yeah, we might actually like and know their names. And therefore we want to do nice things for them. And so it fits in with the desire then, this growing desire to be nice to our children, combined with Industrial Revolution has a bunch of stuff to sell. And then there's going to be many more holidays that will follow that same exact trend. Like, let me think of one that might be get people to buy a bunch of candy or costumes. Could be anything. Yes, there was there before, but not like this. Mother's Day, Father's Day, created by the greeting card companies. Now, that's not necessarily bad. I like my mom and dad. But it's also to sell things, right? And so this comes from, what happened to family sizes? They went down because children are what? Expensive. But you got to feed them now. They're not little workers. But don't forget, this didn't happen overnight. It's going to take a while. And, okay, we talked about thesis statement. So let's get to, by the way, Thomas Nast. That's where our Santa Claus comes from. This is during the Civil War. And you notice the kind of few little soldier references. Hey, you got to start those children young to be ready to fight. You see that in militaristic states or states in war. But we'll come back to Christmas. The women's rights movement also came out of this. These are middle-class women with middle-class values. We got to this period, we got to like. Okay, so we're just a little behind. So the morality of the family was the job of women. What was that name for the name for when women are supposed to be, or their only role in life is to be good wives and housewives and care for the children? What's it called? You said it? Yeah, that cult of domesticity, which they convinced people was the way it always was. Well, for the vast majority of people, it wasn't. But middle-class women who were actually starting to experience this lifestyle in the 1830s and 1840s, they lost power. But if they're supposed to take care of the morale of the family, many thought, should we worry about society too? And that's where you get middle-class women stepping outside the family into the only avenue they felt they could speak besides being in their sphere, the home. And that's things like the abolitionist movement, which is get rid of slavery. Temperance, to control drinking. There's a prison reform, asylum reform for people with, then they would have said insane asylums, but for people with mental illness or whatever it might be. I mean, these were just hellholes. They just would stick people. And the idea was all these to provide rights for people, freedom for slaves. And a lot of women made that jump. If I'm fighting for the freedom for somebody else, what about slavery in our own homes? AKA women's rights. And that's where we get to the fight for equal rights, economic rights, legal and political. And for many of these things, remember, women lost legal, economic, and political rights in the Industrial Revolution. And so a lot of this is to get some of the rights they had back. But which one of these three is the most important? Political. In fact, all of these are political. Who sets the rules for the economy? That's politics. Laws, that's politics. And that gets back to the old thing. And women began to realize if we're not involved in the political process, we will have no voice in the economy, no voice in laws. By the way, if you want to be a dictator, isn't it best to get people to hate politics? Then you make the laws, get people to hate government and think it doesn't do you any good. Then you make the laws. Another way to become a totalitarian dictator. You're welcome. That's on film. So the big push for women would be for suffrage, voting rights, and that's what they're called, suffragettes. And suffragettes is a term from Britain. Remember, they began the Industrial Revolution first. Suffrage is the right to vote. Et would be added for things that were for women or for girls. It's kind of gone away, thankfully. Let you know. Yeah, I thought that. This is on someone's costume. Out of context, it really doesn't. I don't know. Somebody had this on their costume. They walked in, and it doesn't really do.
Oh yeah.
Okay. What? Darkest magic. So, some of the leaders of the early women's rights movement, and don't forget, any fight for rights, it's not somebody on a hill bestowing rights. People have got to fight for rights. Rights are never given to you. You have to fight for them. Lucretia Mott, an incredibly intelligent person who was an able organizer, understood how to not only rally women, but also to be firm and not back down and not compromise on the value that we need the right to vote. And that means it's going to require a fight. She was very intense and somewhat intimidating to a lot of people. And it's interesting that that picture, everybody frowned in early photographs in the 1840s and 1850s. Do you know why? The exposure time was so long. So you had to be still for a really long time, like 3 or 4 seconds. They actually had this thing, a couple of prongs, you can kind of lean your head back into it to keep it still, or it shake on the camera. And so it's harder to smile, so everyone looks kind of like that. And Mott was probably the single most important founder, but these are many women. Don't forget, we talked about the cult of domesticity. A lot of women are fighting against this too, because women are taught from day one to be subservient, and then soon the cult of domesticity ties it all together. But back to this. Elizabeth Cady Stanton, both were happily married, and this is, I'll come back to that in just a second. But Stanton, also incredibly able, very intelligent, but she sometimes was a better face of the movement because she had a little bit more charm. And Mott was so intense, sometimes she intimidated people. And this picture really shows it. Even her not smiling, doesn't it kind of look like a smile? She has that look where, face at rest, she still looks kind of happy and charming and like inviting. It's a great gift to have. There's some people have that face where they just look, if they're not smiling, someone's going to look mean. I'm going to work on my mean face. See, eyebrows down, good face. Okay, with that, and the best is you could, and they give this kind of side. Hey, I'm telling you, you give that look and give yourself a clipboard and walk through the halls, nobody will bug you because they think that person is important and he has a job to do. I've gotten out of so much work. Oh, no. So back to this. And then maybe the most able organizer of all of them was Susan B. Anthony. She was a lot younger. So she was a young woman in the 1840s when this was just beginning. But she dedicated her life to equal rights, but especially the right to vote, with the idea that the rest of it could happen. The 19th Amendment will be the Susan B. Anthony Amendment. And I should add, all of these women are going to be taxed for saying that if they want equal rights, they must hate men, they must hate families, they must hate children. And that has been the traditional way to attack people fighting for rights. That's garbage. They didn't like the cult of domesticity for one very important reason. What was the only avenue for success for women? They must do what? Get married. And their point of view was women, men, everybody should have more than one avenue for success, more than one choice. And if you want to get married and have children and stay at home, for no matter who it is, that's perfectly fine. Or combine that with a career, or not get married, that's your choice. It can't be the only way you're successful is to have that one choice. And so that includes career and college and everything else. It's broadening the field. But a way to attack them is to say that they hate men. We'll get to this in the 1970s. We will come back to the women's rights movement a couple different times, obviously. But in the United States, even though the suffragette movement began in Britain, the U.S. would have the first women's rights convention in Seneca Falls. Seneca Falls, New York, 1848, the year of revolution. And this had the Declaration of Sentiments, and these were the authors. Now, they should have all the people there, they signed off. No, you can't write a paper with this many people. Collaboration actually doesn't work very well. But right on top, Lucretia Mott. Right where she deserves to be. Elizabeth Cady Stanton, mostly women, a few men, more liberals, involved in the abolitionist movement. There's a lot of very famous people, but the most famous one I will mention right there, Frederick Douglass, who was still a young man. He had been a slave, ran away, wrote his autobiography, a tireless fighter, not only against slavery, but for equal rights for all people. Douglass is a pretty amazing guy. And I saw my Frederick Douglass doll. I had to move him because he fell down. That's where he stayed. Mr. Chauncey's son gave that to me, so I would get that a good place. I really like Frederick Douglass. But back to this. They began the document with, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men and women are created equal." Now, of course, most people did not hold that to be self-evident, just like most people didn't hold, or most people didn't believe where this document came from. Where did it come from? Where did that saying came from? We hold these truths to be self-evident. Yeah. People didn't hold that to be self-evident in 1776, that all men were created equal. So this is a radical document saying this is what we should be as a country and a republic. And so it laid out, though, the fight is going to be for suffrage. And this is going to be a 72-year fight. The 19th Amendment, we'll come back to this obviously, will be known as the Susan B. Anthony Amendment. And there's something very important about it. They really thought if women could vote, these laws would change. And yeah, there would be changes, but not completely. Women still, as of today, are not guaranteed equal rights under the Constitution. Women do not get paid the same as men do for the same job, with the same amount of experience. And there's other role barriers in front of women, especially when it comes to issues of personal health that men don't have to worry about at the same way. So that is still an issue. We'll come back to this again. We'll come back to this again a few more times. But it starts here in the Industrial Revolution. So what the Industrial Revolution, kind of a big deal. Speaking of that, religion. This would be a dramatic upheaval in religious activities. Capitalism, the wage system, and all the technology and change. What that did to, when there's change and you don't know what tomorrow leads to, is insecurity. Every time there's a great change in society, there's an uptick in religious and spiritual activity. And it's almost always new spiritual practices or religions. The old denominations seem to be failing, and they look to something else. And there'll be uptick every single time. So in American history in the 1740s, you saw this. We saw this here. We'll see it again in the 1880s and 1890s, 1920s, 1950s and 60s, 1990s. And it's happening today. There's a lot of insecurity. And so you see a big shift today. This is one of those tent revivals. In fact, literally with tents. But it happens both ways. The so-called liberal churches, and liberal means, and I'll talk more about what liberal and conservative means, but in this context, more rights for everybody. Where the church would be like, we have more individual control, or the individual have more control of themselves, not one person telling people what to do. And they basically accepted it, this new economy, and the concept of empiricism. Empiricism is like science and math trying to organize our planet. And that includes everything from the new sciences that are being developed at that time. Virtually all of our science today is being developed in the Industrial Revolution, biological, chemistry, physics. What we know of is being specialized then, but also just something just like the clock. But they believe in this world, everybody has a chance for salvation because there is a loving God. And so you don't have to act a certain way to try to get into heaven. This has a relationship to Puritanism, but also deism. Remember deism or the creator, and talk about that in the Declaration of Independence. And one more thing. A couple big churches that come out of this are the Unitarians and the Universalists. And the Universalists, the closest church, they all come out of the Puritans, which is kind of weird. The one, we're going to read the Bible and follow every word to prove that we are blessed and going to heaven. 2, we are all going to heaven. Let's be good people. And the Congregationalists are an example of that today. That, in fact, Congregationalists and the Universalists are the same. But I should add, the point is this. They stress the idea of being good, ethical people because it's the right thing to do. And therefore, we're going to adapt to the society. Don't be a good and ethical person just because you want to try to get into heaven. Do it because it's the right thing to do. And so, as society changed, we adapt to it, just continue to be a good person. That was one change. They would be popular, but actually not as popular as the opposite of this. Never have this? By the way, that's a Massachusetts. These Unitarian churches are pretty cool churches. They look like meeting halls. The Second Great Awakening was something a little bit different, this radical religious shift. All this disruption in society. Now, the first one was fear of the Enlightenment. This one of capitalism, like the wage system, and all these machines. You know, we don't look at the train as being that, even if you could kind of imagine, but the train doesn't seem like that big of a deal to us. But the train would just blew them away. All these machines making things just changed everything. Steam power. And it led to this idea of let's go back to the way it was. A wave of nostalgia. Let's go back before society was so complex. And this is a generally conservative idea. Let's go back. Now, they don't mean go back literally to 1800. They meant, let's go back to what we would have liked 1800 to be. You know, they pick out some good things and say it was all great. When people just didn't have to worry about these machines and the jobs, and maybe you'll lose it and you'll starve. No, we'll go back to when life was better. It's basically this nostalgic idea. Now, you catch that? Way things should have been. So this is an idealized version of the past, ignoring the bad things. A couple examples of Baptism and Methodists. And here's one of these country revivals. I'll tell you more about that later. But see, people are swooning, she's fainting. A couple things about this. This happens all the time to this day. Or times of great change, people say, let's go back to when things were just easier, just better. Like in going into the 1920s with all this new scientific revolution, they look back to the 1890s. And the 1890s were kind of hell. And then, like, I remember the 1970s, when I vividly remember, they look back to the 1950s. In fact, the most popular television show of the 1970s, at least mid-1970s, was a show called Happy Days. Some of you might have heard of Happy Days. It's a show about the 1950s. It doesn't age very well. Shows sometimes don't age very well. 1980s is the look back at the 60s. The 90s was the look back at the 70s. For the last 10 years, people have been kind of looking back to where? 90s. In fact, I had two people with Friends shirts on in class today. They show Friends from the 1990s, which is like showing like this resurgence of popularity, which I don't understand. The show is painfully bad. But does anybody like Friends? That says more about you. No, it's kind of funny though. People they look back at this idealized version. I'm going to tell you something. Life actually wasn't like the show. Did I just blow your mind? Hey, the 1950s were a time of intense racism and sexism, high poverty rate, the constant fear of blowing the world up, McCarthyism, people running down for their ideals. No, they were really bad times. The 1990s, I mean, wow. Really bad times in the 1990s. Disruption all of the world, the wave of terrorist attacks, it was pretty bad. 1970s, have you seen bell-bottom pants? I mean, this is real problems. Yet people forget the bad things, and they want to go back to the way things, and get this point now. They want to go back. See, when we don't know what tomorrow's like, we don't know our place. So the point is, go back to where people knew their place. They knew their place. Now, sometimes I could just be like, I knew that tomorrow everything's going to be okay. Has everyone got that? But it also could be like in the 1970s. All these uppity women are wanting rights. Let's go back to the 1950s where women knew their place. Did you catch what I just did there? So women shut up and go back. You were happy in the 50s, weren't you? No. Same thing they said about the civil rights movement. Let's go back. No one complained about not having equal rights in the 1950s. Yeah, because they'd be arrested. So, do you catch my point there? It's also a way to shut people up. So with that, we have these evangelical revivals. And evangelical, you might have heard that term. Basically what we're talking about there is it actually affects all religions, but most people think of Christianity in Europe and the United States, trying to get people to join your church. Trying to get people to join. That's evangelical. Join. And they had these revivals of these new religions. The Methodists had these tent revivals, and they would be huge. And people would go there looking for security. The world is safe. I want somebody to make me feel safe. Let's say the world is safe. Yeah. Let's retry. The world is scary. I want to feel safe. Which, by the way, is one of the best political moves you can do. I want to be safe. And the world is scary. You see this time after time. Especially if they convince people, hey, everything used to be great. Let's just go back to the way it was. And if you don't know your history, wouldn't it be easy to be manipulated? if you don't know the way things really were, which happens all the time. But what they would do is, these were very emotional. They were personal. It wasn't like the Puritans, where it would be, you must read the Bible and follow this exactly to show that you're one of the blessed, or Catholic or Episcopal, where it's much more dogmatic and there's certain things you must do. I'm slightly exaggerating, but if you are Catholic, I think you know what I'm talking about. There's certain things you have to do. This, it's open, it's free. You decide. It's very emotional. It's not what's in the Bible, it's how it makes you feel. And that's where you get terms like born again came out of this. The term born again, where you have a different personal relationship with your faith. And the rapture comes out of the Second Great Awakening, where when Judgment Day comes, some people go to heaven and some people don't. And that is a Second Great Awakening idea. There were elements of this before, but not this way. And there's a group called the Millennials. In fact, all these churches were all the Second Great Awakening churches were millennial churches. Don't think in terms of the silly generational stuff they talk about today. You know, all those generation things which are, they're so arbitrary, they're kind of silly. Millennials meant they believe that the Judgment Day has happened, or it's going, or just about ready to happen. Does everyone catch that? Either we just had Judgment Day, or it's going to happen. We'll decide heaven or hell. Judgment Day is here. By the way, this isn't the loving God of the universalists. What kind of God is this? Vengeful. I will spike down your enemies. And you know what? If you're scared, isn't it nice to have somebody who will get your enemies? You think about it for a second. If you're scared, what do you want? I'm scared of those people. My belief, get them. Which also is kind of scary too. But that's for the millennials. They believed it's coming. They believe it's here. And so, here's the point. Here's the idea of this. Accept the material world. And the answers will be in the spiritual. You'll get an afterlife. And that's where we get people who will soon be called born again, where they will feel like this wave of religious ecstasy come over them. And in this fervor, they will dance and shake and faint and sway, get up and do like these strange moves and spin and speak in tongues. You know what I mean when I say speak in tongues? You kind of speak like this, I don't want to say gibberish, but to someone who believes that it's opposed to somebody else, it's not gibberish. But somebody else is speaking through you. And what? Harry Potter speaks through him? But that's in Harry Potter. And I had someone first period say, like you're possessed. Well, not. It depends on your point of view. And so, yeah, that's where you get this. You see them fainting and there are. This is not just Christianity, but that was for most of the citizens of the U.S. at that time. And there are still places out there where there are still churches and other religious gatherings that are kind of like this to this day. But there's an important element. These 10 revivals are traveling around the country, and yes, they get offerings to get money from people, but they also have sources of income and help from other people. Who benefits from a philosophy that says, accept the way things are, and in the afterlife, you'll be better? Who? Maybe the government, but in this context, it's not. It could be the government in some cases. Business. Hey, accept that you don't have the machines and someone else gets the fruit of your labor. Accept that the profits go someplace else and you work on a wage system. Accept this. And this is what you have to get. A lot of the money that would go for these new religious organizations would come from capitalists. Would that happen today? Of course. Of course. If you convince people to say, hey, or I can't change what's going on now, I'll worry about the afterlife, doesn't that give a green light for people to keep doing what they're doing? Hey, don't worry what goes on here. The afterlife matters. And by the way, that's really kind of sad. To get people who really are scared and to manipulate them like that. Doesn't mean it always happened, but that is what happened. I should add, a lot of times they would more and more call them preachers, and that came from Britain. But they were called charismatics, which is actually a pretty good name for that. Their charisma would suck people in.
What a seer.
C-H. C-H-A-R-I-S-M-A-T-I-C. It's one of those weird ones where charismatic CH. Yeah. The English language is weird. Thanks, Noah Webster. He wrote the first dictionary. And I thank Noah Webster for everything. It just keeps me. I accept. I can't do anything else except thank Noah Webster. So with that, the burnt over district of New York where a lot of this religious activity happened, and it was burnt over for the fire and brimstone sermons. Heaven or hell, fire and brimstone, burnt over. No, they did not have big forest fires. Somebody third period said that. Were there fires? Yes. They all burnt down. But it kind of makes sense. And these are some of the groups from the Millerites, the Mormons, a lot of abolitionist churches, they all came out of this movement. But New York, the center of the new capitalism is New York City. So it kind of makes sense it would be here. And so with that, we get kind of some French Protestant groups. And the church will call them cults. In a lot of ways, you might see them as cults, like Matthias, which I don't have time to talk about. But the Shakers, for example, the Shakers are a group, and this is a Shaker wedding. They would literally shake in religious fervor, and quiver and then pass out. And they formed these communities to break away from this industrial world where they could live a very simple life. The problem was they believed in marriage, but they didn't believe in sexual relations. So what happened to the Shakers? They're gone now. And if you're not sure the function of that, once again, go talk to your health teacher. But with that, the Millerites might be one of the most famous one. And they believed that the millennium was about ready to happen. And they believed it was going to be a certain day in March of 1843. And here's the grand ascension of the Miller Tabernacle, while they go to heaven and everybody else is burnt up in the fires of hell on the earth. I think the rapture comes from that. You get the rapture. And what they did on that day, this is mocking them, but it's the Millerites, they went on the roofs of their homes at night and waited for on that night it was supposed to happen. They were all going to be taken off. And what happened when morning came? The amazing thing is they were very disappointed. I thought the world was going to end. And then they said, oh, we're sorry. And they came another day, a year later, it didn't happen. If you predict the world's going to end and it doesn't happen, you lose credibility. They would later become the Seventh-day Adventists out of that religion. That's another one we'll get to right here, because I'm not going to talk about Matthias, it's too complex. Some of these churches that start out very much on the fringe and sometimes not even quite Protestant would become very much more mainstream from this era. The Seventh-day Adventists, but probably one that's very much bigger in Western United States, and I'll talk more about them later, would be the LDS or the Mormon Church. And one of the reasons they were bitterly attacked is this cartoon is against plural marriage. Polygamy, but they call it plural marriage. And saying that, I find it interesting, all the wives must submit to the husband, but the way that most people treat wives is humorous. And in fact, they would flee to, one of the reasons they would flee from Illinois to Utah was to escape the United States in this persecution. But I just thought this was fascinating. They escaped to Utah, and they're going to the skeleton. Of course, that was kind of part of the idea. Have you been to Salt Lake City? It's a desert. And so who would go? Who would follow? It could be alone. We'll come back to them when we get to the Mexican-American War, but it's one of the biggest religions in the world today, so clearly it's become more mainstream. And utopian societies. Another one to break away from the market. And these were people who thought, if everyone's just trying to get rich and self-interest, we're leaving people behind. They wanted to, what is the term for, we'll come together and share everything in the, commune or communists, which is a form of socialism. Fourier was a socialist who started these in England, so Fourierism came to the United States. Brook Farm was another one that was in your textbook. Another one was Oneida, and they also would be a commune, and it still exists today. And to make money for the make money for the community, they'd make fine china, and still make some of the best china, some of the most prized china in the world today is Oneida. But they also believed in, yes, they would be married, but it's more like communal. So like, you wouldn't be just with one husband and wife, you'd be all together. And so they had actually the concept they would call it be free love. And that would be bitterly attacked. I think you could probably guess why. But this is a picture of them like all raising the children. And this is supposed to be positive, but I can't help but think this is relatively creepy. It's children's hour. Like, what's gonna happen to them? Okay, so I can. Oh. Yeah, Seventh-day Adventists, which is different than other Protestant denominations, but it's become very big. And they would branch off into groups. In fact, one of the most famous, what's called the cult in the United States, called the Branch Davidians. But transcendentalism is another idea that come out of this. And transcendental idea, it's not, I mean, religion's complex. So this is a spiritual belief. It's maybe not quite a religion. It's like a combination of religion and philosophy. But let's be honest, they're all different styles of spiritual belief. And what this is it moved beyond these group activities to the power of the individual. And I look at it as like this new capitalistic world is everyone's money grubbing and trying to get rich, trying to make rules for everything, whether they be laws or scientific laws, and they'll step above it. So here's a painting. You don't need no Friedrich's name. But there's all these series of paintings at this time that fit this attitude. It would start in Europe and come to the United States. And it's always like one man. It's always a man, like on a mountain, above everything else. And what's below? Chaos. Very abundant. Or it'll be like one tree on like a little island surrounded by water. You know, things like that. Mountain climbing became like a thing in that time, part of it to get above the fray. Nobody climbed mountains before that. Why? Yeah, why would you climb a mountain? Then it became, I will do it because I can do it. So, transcendentalism is, Ralph Waldo Emerson is given the credit, even though in reality, they're taking from the Romantics in Europe. He's directly taking from the Romantics in England, areas that already begun the Industrial Revolution. Here's Emerson right here. Emerson's a pretty interesting guy. I like some of Emerson's writings, even though a little arrogant, but romantic is another name for this nostalgia. To go back to when life was easier. As they saw in this new empirical world, with science and math and capitalism runs everything, let's go back to when we didn't have that, a more natural state. The Romantics and the Transcendentalists, they look back to the Middle Ages, where we didn't have such rules in science. I should add, this is not romantic love. It is romantic of an idealized vision of the past, where people knew their place and didn't have to worry about it. And some very dangerous philosophies are romantic. The National Socialists, aka the Nazis, are romantic. Isn't that weird to think about them as romantic? But they have a very warped view of the past and the way people should act. So, moving on. So, it all comes up, I don't know why, but they feared capitalism. They feared this scientific rule. So they're going to transcend this world of numbers and science and greed and capitalism and go back to nature. So we will leave this world where everybody's grubbing for money and all they care about is getting rich and go to nature. Transcend means to go above, to step outside. So like I am transcending the classroom. Oh, I see the world so much differently now. It's scary. Okay, so with that, but by its very nature, it's saying this. Look at all you people. Look at all you. Money grubbing, care about nothing but the most base instincts. I don't want to have anything to do with you. I'm stepping away because you're a bunch of what? Idiots. by its very nature, this is a very elitist idea, where most people can't understand how great I am. Which is true, right? You can't understand, can you? You don't want to understand. And one of the most famous works of this era was Henry David Thoreau's On Civil Disobedience. Who's had to read this for class? Did you like it? It's hard to read. And in it, he said that, I'm laying out the most basic element of it. All just people must disobey unjust laws. It is your duty to disobey unjust laws. And he lays out a number of things, but the gist of it, what he wanted you to get out of this, is that he was taking a noble stand against taxes by not paying them because of his opposition to the Mexican War. Why I put 3 question marks, I have no idea. But it's opposition to the Mexican War, because the Mexican War was a war of conquest to spread slavery. He's taking a stand against us. Everyone got that? It's about slavery. He's taking a stand. And this would have this noble ideal, which it's basically saying, these people made bad laws, and yes, it's the law, but I'm going to fight against it. This would have great influence. Anybody think of somebody this is influence? To some degree, Martin Luther King, or more importantly, the entire civil rights movement, at least at first. Gandhi was another example. You would see the Intifada in Palestine that's happening right now. It has great influence with the over 1 million people protesting the authoritarian government in Chile. There are 2 million people today who are protesting the authoritarian government in Iraq, in Baghdad. 2 million people protesting that. Can you imagine 2 million people, aka twice of Montana? In Chile, it's over 1 million today, right now, protesting this. Not breaking stuff, not fighting civil disobedience. The problem is Thoreau's lying. Sure, he didn't pay the tax, but he didn't pay the tax because he thought everybody in government was an idiot. And I'm not going to give you my money because you're dumb and I'm smart. And then he went back and said, no, I'm going to do it for a more noble purpose. Thoreau was one of those people that believed he could do no wrong and could do anything he wanted. He would show up at people's homes, friends of his, and stay for a year. Huh? To live off eat their food. Yeah, that's why, and by the way, this is very elite. People have this philosophy of got to be either like Thoreau and willing to milk off your friends, or what do you have to be to leave all this money grubbing and everything aside? You must already be what? And you got to have money to do this. You don't see people who are poor thinking, I'm going to transcend this and go off and live in a tree. Those are usually people who have money, but they know the tree thing doesn't work, I'm still okay. I'm not a big fan of transcendentalists. I don't like the elitism. I'm too good for that. And so the thing is, so last thing really quick for today. The temperance. Yeah. They were Germans. So they were German separatists. And then like most of them went to Russia and then left Russia to avoid the draft and went someplace that I thought was like Russia, North Dakota. I'm simplifying too much, but that's kind of what happened. So the temperance movement also ties in with religion. How can temperate means basically controlling your baser emotions, and you can see how drink would. And that is, for religious purposes, drinking could get in the way of your faith. But also, think about what this did to families in the new industrial revolution. There's only one wage to feed everybody. You're consumers, you have to buy what you need. If that wage is going away to alcohol, what happens to the family? So there's clearly problems with drinking before, but it's a real problem here. Carrie Nation was the most famous. She was going to be after the Civil War, and she was best known for taking her axe and going into taverns and chopping up the bars, and basically coming in there. And you didn't want to mess with what was she, 4'8"? You didn't want to mess with her. That means that don't have to be that big to be fierce and somebody to be reckoned with. But there's somebody else. Capitalists also really liked the temperance movement. Did you catch that? Why? People drank 10 times more then than they do now. Before the Industrial Revolution, 10 times more. Sunday was a day to drink pretty much all day. So that meant Monday was a day to do what? Sleep. But capitalists want you to come into work on Monday, don't they? They don't want you to be hungover. They don't want you to be drunk at work. Don't they have a financial interest to get you to work sober? This is a cartoon. It's mocking her, saying she's doing it for God's work, yet it says you can drink in the Bible. But let's get here. Attention! Look at that class. That's how I want this class. As luck would have it, in your margin, you get a gift. I'm going to give you a gift for the last 3 minutes. You ready? You ready? You excited? You excited? Write a thesis. Just for practice, write a thesis. Right now, do it. You got 2 minutes. Huh? So remember, get the main point of it, take some kind of position on it, and the positions not only agree, but what? It's because of insecurity, because of capitalism. I want hints out there. And then give me 3 good examples. Does everyone got what I mean? You should better get this done before the bell rings. Will help if I do a bell ringer. Isn't it amazing how long that just goes? You're not turning it down. That's fine. This is just practice. It's just practice. You're in trouble. That's probably you miss. Take a position. Agree. Maybe try something that some reason it was happening. Make sure there are concrete examples of that. David Fox. And you know, that's why I did this one. So we just had it. You probably want to take a test. You got paper?
I do.
Okay. So there's one of those desks out there right now.
Yep.
Take the best one. The stream is going off, people. Should we show them a shirtless Putin? Okay. Somebody gave me a shirtless Putin and Trump last year. My finger puppets. Hard. Okay. I got to work my metro.